Hey everyone, in this video we're going to unpack the idea of the cases. Now this is something we've hit at before, and it's something that we really need to dive into at the beginning of your Latin career, right? Understanding what the cases are, how they relate to nouns, and you're really getting at this idea of how we translate nouns, how are they used in sentences, right? So this is something that we hit at in a previous video, and I told you I'd kind of unpack it a bit more. This is where we're going to start that process, right? And again, hopefully you're watching this at the beginning of your Latin career. If not, you probably already know what's going on here, but when you're first starting out, it can be really tricky to understand what the cases are and how they work. So to really unpack that, we need to start with this idea. What is a noun? And you've seen this slide before if you've watched some of my previous videos. But it's a basic question with a really simple answer, right? A noun is a person, place, thing, or idea. It's pretty straightforward, right? So why are we asking this? Well, because in Latin, nouns have three aspects. They have case, number, and gender. We talked about gender in a previous video, right? Gender is whether it's masculine, feminine, or neuter. The number is whether it's singular or plural. The case, I told you in that video, is how it's being used in a sentence. And this is why I'm making this sort of follow-up video for you, is to explain what I mean by that, right? What do I mean when I say how it's being used in a sentence? It's kind of a tricky idea to understand, and it's something that a lot of my students, when they first start out, it's hard for them to really wrap their head around. I know it was for me when I was a student first learning Latin. It took me a minute to figure out, like, what are you talking about? How's a noun being used? What do you mean, right? It was a little confusing. The reason it's confusing is because we don't really use cases in English, right? It's not what we do. We use word order instead, and we'll talk about that in a second. But a case is just how it's being used in a sentence. And you can recognize that in Latin by the way it's spelled, the ending of the noun. That's the key idea that we'll talk about as we go through this video. But the key idea, again, the way that the noun is spelled is telling you how it's being used. So it'll tell you, hey, this is the subject, or this is the direct object, or this is showing possession, right? You can tell that all by how the word is spelled. So there are six main cases in Latin. And again, these names, you can memorize them. You see them a lot in textbooks. Obviously, they refer to them. You don't need to necessarily know these to be able to figure it out. But, if you want to go with kind of the standard route, they're called nominative, genitive, dative, accusative, ablative, and vocative. And again, the reason I'm saying you don't necessarily need to memorize these is these are grammar terms, right? And language, sometimes when you bog it down with grammar, you just make things more confusing. So if this is confusing for you, don't worry. We'll kind of take it one piece at a time. But these are what they're called. That way you can recognize them in your textbook. And again, I mentioned the word order is what's really throwing this whole thing off. So in Latin, it has to do with cases, the ending, right? In English, it's about word order. This is confusing, right? Because in English, if you're a native English speaker, you know that the word order is subject, verb, direct object. So for example, you would say something like, I see the dog. When you play with the word order, now you're messing around with the meaning. So there's a difference between I see the dog and the dog sees me, right? Those mean two completely different ideas. I used basically the same words, right? But when I moved the order around, I was changing who or what the subject was, right? In my first example, I see the dog. I'm the subject, right? I'm the one doing something, seeing in this example. The dog goes from being the direct object, the thing that's being seen, to the subject, right? The dog sees me. This is where we can start to mess around with meaning in English, right? And why it's important to get the order of words correct in English. That really doesn't matter so much in Latin. This is a key difference, like I said, and something that throws off a lot of my students when we first start our Latin journey together. Is it can be tricky when I tell you the word order doesn't really matter because you're so ingrained, if you're a native English speaker, to going left to right and trying to deduce meaning by the order of the words. That's not what we're doing in Latin, which makes it tricky. In Latin, it's all about the endings of words. So the order doesn't really matter. It's much more flexible. In general, it tends to go subject, direct, object, verb. It doesn't have to, right? You can play around with the word order basically however you want. There are instances where the word order is important, but it's much more flexible. So this is something we need to wrap our heads around, right? Why doesn't the word order matter? Well, it's because of the cases and the noun endings, which is what this video is about. So if you look here at this slide, we have six sentences here, right? They all involve Cornelius. They involve a girl, the puellon, and they involve the verb hearing, audit, right? It means he, she, or it hears. So in each one, I've moved the order of the words around, right? Changed the word order. So for a lot of my students, when they start, I'll show them this example and I'll say, what do these sentences mean, right? And they'll say, oh, Cornelius hears the girl. The girl hears Cornelius. Someone hears Cornelius and the girl, right? They just get confused because the word order is changing. That's not what these mean. All six of these sentences mean the exact same thing. Cornelius hears the girl. And it's a good way to illustrate that the word order is not what's happening here, not what's dictating the meaning. It's about the ending. So what we're going to learn is the word Cornelius, for instance, when it's spelled with that US ending, it's nominative, right? It's the subject. It has to be because of the spelling. Same thing with Puellam. That AM ending is telling you this is a direct object. The girl's not doing anything. Something's happening to the girl, right? She's being heard in this case. So this is a good slide to just pause on and kind of break that mentality that word order is the most important thing. It's not. You're really looking at the endings of nouns. So what does this all mean, right? What are the cases? Well, I mentioned one, a few seconds ago, the nominative case. This is the first one that you want to think about. The nominative is the subject of the sentence. So more often than not, if you were in my class, you'd hear me say, where's the subject? I don't really tend to use the term nominative because, again, sometimes that can confuse my students when you're trying to memorize grammar terms, and I'd rather have you just dive into the language, right? But it's the subject. So who or what is doing the action? Very straightforward. So if we go back to my sentence I gave you a couple slides ago of I see the dog, the question is, who's seeing something? Oh, I am. I am the subject, right? I'm the person doing the seeing. This is the form that you see in a dictionary. If you were to pick up a Latin to English dictionary, let's say you were looking up the word girl and you see puella. Puella is nominative case. Nominative singular is the most common form of that noun, right? And that's the one that you see listed out in the dictionary. So how does this work in sort of an example? Well, if you watch this video and take a look at it, how would you describe the action? You'd say the giraffe is eating. Right? So the question is, who or what is eating? Eating is the verb. Who's eating? The giraffe is. The giraffe is the subject. If we were to flip this sentence into Latin, we'd have to put the noun giraffe in the nominative case. And in this case, it would be nominative singular because there's only one of them. What about the genitive case? Well, the genitive case shows possession, right? What does that mean? Well, you're trying to tell your listener or your audience who something belongs to, right? If that makes sense. It's the possession idea. Who or what does this belong to? So this is actually also listed in the dictionary, but it's for a different reason. We'll cover that in a different video. But genitive singular does actually show up in the dictionary too. But it's not really about that. It's about possession more often than not. And the word that we use in English to show this is of. You don't need to. In English, a lot of times we use the apostrophe S to show possession. You can do that with genitive case too. Have fun. I tend to find that translating it as of in English will help you because it's not necessarily just used for translation. So of kind of covers the different uses, and we'll dive into those in a later video. But an example would be something like this, right? You're taking a look at this video, you're watching the Earth and the Sun. How do I describe what's happening here? I could say Earth is a planet of the Sun, meaning Earth belongs to the Sun. I'm showing possession. How did I show that? In English, I use the phrase of the sun. If I were to put that into Latin, of the sun would have to be genitive case, right? Because I'm saying the earth belongs to the sun. Another way to say this is to say something like, Earth is the sun's planet, right? Apostrophe S, the sun's planet, meaning it belongs to the sun. You'd be saying the same thing. The next case we want to talk about is dative case. Now, this is something called an indirect object. And again, we're kind of hitting on some grammar terms here. So hopefully you remember this from, elementary school, middle school, whenever it is that you were diving into English grammar. Hopefully you haven't blocked that part of your memory out. I know I did in a lot of ways, but hopefully you remember some of this. And if you don't, it's totally fine. But the grammar term for this is an indirect object. So it's to who or for whom something, someone gave something is kind of one way to think about it. So the words we use in English to translate dative are to and for. And it usually goes with verbs of giving, showing, and telling. So you can tell something to someone. You could do something for someone. I could give a gift to someone, right? That to someone is what we call the indirect object. And the idea here is they're not directly receiving the action, right? So in other words, if I said, I give the gift to you, I'm not giving you, I'm giving the gift. And the gift is going to you. You're kind of a little removed from the action, if that makes sense. And again, I don't want to go too far into making this too grammar heavy. We can kind of unpack it in later videos, but that's the general idea. You translate it as to or for. So if you're taking a look at this picture, right, you could describe this action, maybe if it was a video or something like that, you'd say, I gave a gift to my friend. To my friend is the indirect object. Again, I didn't give my friend, I gave a gift to my friend. That's what we call the dative case. So in Latin, to my friend would have to be dative. The next case we want to think about is the accusative case. So if dative is an indirect object, the accusative is a direct object. And again, hopefully you remember some of this from school. If not, no big deal. We can unpack it as we go. But the general idea is who or what received the action of the verb. So what does that even mean, right? We see this a lot in textbooks. Someone received the action. And a lot of my students get confused by that. Like, what do you even mean by that? So it kind of goes like this. It's answering the question who or what, or whom or what, you might say. It's also used with some prepositions, which is an idea I'll put in a separate video, right? Prepositional phrases, but just know sometimes it goes with prepositions like into or toward. Not a big deal. In general, it's a direct object. So what do I mean by that? Well, let's take a look here. If I were describing the action of this adorable video of two dogs in a park, right? I could describe this by saying the dogs are wearing jackets, right? So the subject is the dogs, right? They're the ones wearing something. Now I'm asking the question, what are they wearing? The answer is jackets, right? That's the thing that they are wearing. That's what we call the direct object in English, right? So in other words, if the action is wearing something, what's being worn is kind of one way to put it. Jackets are, right? I assume these are jackets. I don't know. Raincoats, however you want to describe this, right? Jackets would be the plural accusative in Latin, right? Because it's a direct object. That's how you want to think of it. Another example would be the one I gave you for dative case. If you said, I gave a gift to my friend, the question is, well, what did you give? I gave a gift, right? Oh, got it. I gave a gift. Gift would be the direct object. Same thing is happening here, right? Whether it's giving a gift or the dog's wearing jackets, it's that direct object. The ablative case is the tricky one, right? That's how I described it here. It is one of the more complicated ones in Latin. I think it's the trickiest. Maybe that's just me personally. Other people might disagree. That's totally fine. But I remember when I was first learning Latin, this one kind of blew my mind. I was like, wait, what are we talking about? What does this even mean, right? It has a weird name, ablative. Like, what does that even mean, right? And it threw me off when I was first looking at Latin. So it is a little tricky, but when you unpack its uses, it's actually a little bit easier than I think sometimes my students make it. So one aspect of it is it's used with some prepositions. And again, I'll make a separate video for you on prepositional phrases. But when it's by itself, more often than not, it's showing how something was done. Sometimes we call this the adverbial case. And again, these are general rules. It's not perfect. But in general, you can translate a noun in the ablative case with the English by, with, from, and on. It's not going to work every time, but it's pretty close to what it's doing almost every time. And I think it's easier to kind of see this in context in terms of Latin, right? Look at Latin sentences and you'll understand what's happening. But if you try to keep in mind of how something happened, sometimes that's the easiest way to understand it. So if you're watching this video, right, I can see that there's an owner, I'm assuming, right, a person, someone, is petting the dog, right? So the subject is the owner, pets is the verb, the dog is the direct object, right? The thing being petted, right? But now I want to understand, how is this person petting the dog? Well, I could say they're petting the dog with his hand or her hand. I'm not even sure here. I wrote his, but who knows, right? With their hand, maybe is a better way to put it. With their hand is telling you how they're petting the dog, right? But hand is a noun. Okay, so I'm taking that noun of hand and I would put it into the ablative case in Latin. When I'm doing that, I'm showing you how the owner pet the dog with their hand. Oh, got it. Yep, that's how they did it. That's one of the common uses of the ablative case. And again, it's not perfect, so you don't want to just go off this, but it'll at least get you moving in the right direction of what this case is used for and what it looks like in Latin. The last one we want to cover, vocative case. This one's actually really straightforward and pretty easy. Direct address. What do I mean by that? Well, if you're calling someone by name, use the vocative case, right? The term vocative actually comes from vocare, which means to call in Latin, right? So you're either calling them by name, or it could be a fun nickname or an insult or whatever you want to call them. It's something you're calling them, right? So for example, if I were to, take a look at this picture, you could imagine that this woman is saying, hi, friend, or maybe you're saying hi to her, however you want to play it, right? When you say hi, friend, friend is the vocative case in Latin. That's what I'm calling this person. I'm directly calling them by name. Notice I didn't use their name. This could have been, I don't know, Sally or Cindy Lou, whoever, right? Maybe in Latin, Flavia or Cornelia. It could be their name, or it could be sort of a nickname. I'm giving them friend, right? If you use the Ecce Romani textbook like I use with my students, they like to use the word stupid, right? Stolte is kind of a good one, right? Hey, stupid, get over here. It's kind of mean, but whatever you're calling someone, when you directly call them out or call them by their name or whatever name you're giving them, that needs to be the vocative case, okay? Pretty straightforward. So let's just do a quick recap, because again, this is supposed to be a brief overview, and we'll dive into more details in different videos. But a quick recap. A case is just how the Latin noun is being used, right? How's it being used in a sentence? Is it the subject, the direct object? Is it showing possession? We represent that in Latin with the cases, right? The ending is what's going on. In English, word order tells you what's going on in the sentence, the noun's function, right? If it's at the beginning of the sentence or before your verb, it's the subject, right? That doesn't happen in Latin. The ending of the noun tells you what it's doing. It tells you its case. So it's not about word order. It's about the spelling, the ending of the noun. There are 6 main cases in Latin. We covered them, right? Nominative, accusative, genitive, dative, ablative, vocative. We went through those 6. And when you translate Latin, right? When you're translating Latin, you need to pay attention to the noun ending. When you run into a Latin noun, pay attention. How is it spelled? That's how you're going to know what it's doing in the sentence. Again, it's not about left to right word order. It's about the ending. So I would encourage you not to necessarily go hunting for these. Again, I've mentioned this in another video. When you translate Latin, you could hunt for the subject, right? Look for a nominative ending on a noun, and you've got your subject. That's one way to do it. But I like to read it left to right. I would recommend you at least try reading the sentence left to right. And the more you read it, particularly reading it out loud, you'll hear and kind of catch what the ending is, and you'll start to associate it with being the subject. I think that's a little bit easier than memorizing charts and constantly looking at charts. The more you can read and practice this, the better off you're going to be, right? Because you don't want to be confused, because like I said, this is different. If you're a native English speaker, this is completely different than what you've learned, which is why a lot of people struggle with Latin, right? They're like, what is happening here? I don't understand. So I think it's good to just break it down into some basics. We'll do a couple videos on it. And the more you practice this, the more sense it's going to make.